The Galactic Union had long dismissed humanity as nothing more than a myth, a cautionary tale whispered among the stars. Stories of an ancient species that had burned too brightly, too fiercely before vanishing into the abyss of time. The Union scholars laugh at the absurdity of such legends. After all, no records of humans exist in the great archives, no artifacts, no ruins, no evidence, just stories. Then the warships arrived. The first sighting came from an outpost on the fringes of the Union's territory. A lone scout ship detected massive energy signatures that defied classification. The readings were erratic, impossible. Shimmering distortions in space where no ship should exist. Before the scout crew could send a full report, the distortion stabilized and reality itself seemed to split apart. The warships emerged from nothingness. Sleek and dark, their hulls reflecting no light, only the cold certainty of death. Admiral Von of the Zari Dominion received the first distress call. At first, he dismissed it as a malfunction, but when another outpost fell silent, then another, the truth became undeniable. Something was moving through the stars, and it was nothing the Union had ever encountered before. Within hours, the High Council convened. Theories flew like sparks from a dying star. Was it a rogue species? A malfunctioning AI fleet? Some unknown galactic anomaly? None could explain the eerie precision of the attacks, nor the unsettling way the enemy ships moved, silent, methodical, as if every step had been preordained. Then came the message. It was a simple broadcast relayed across every known frequency. No translation matrix was needed, for the words resonated with an ancient authority that defied language barriers. A single voice, cold and unyielding, spoke. We were forgotten. Now you will remember. Panic erupted among the Union worlds. The myths were real. The humans had returned. But the greatest horror was yet to come. The warships did not negotiate. They did not demand tribute or surrender. They came with a singular purpose, retribution. The first planet to fall was Varnak III, a military stronghold with defenses that had withstood centuries of war. It lasted precisely 47 minutes. Sensors recorded strange, unseen forces ripping through the planet's shields as if they were paper. Defensive cannons fired blindly, but their weapons simply vanished, consumed by an unknown technology. The last transmission from the planet was a single word, whispered in disbelief by the fleet commander. Impossible. The Union scrambled to mount defense, but for every strategy they devised, the humans countered with brutal efficiency. Their ships did not function like any known vessels. Their energy signatures constantly shifted. Their weapons tore through shields as if they did not exist. And worst of all, they never spoke. No surrender, no explanation, just cold, methodical destruction. Admiral Von, now tasked with leading the last line of defense, studied the ancient myths for any clue, any weakness. He scoured forbidden texts, digging through the superstitions his people had long dismissed. And then he found it, buried deep in the oldest archives. There was one recurring warning in every story about humans. They do not forget, they do not forgive, and when they return, they bring the wrath of forgotten gods. The war had only just begun. Admiral Von stood at the center of the war room, staring at the holographic display of the front lines. Red dots marked every planet, every station, every fleet that had fallen in the last 72 hours. The spread of destruction was impossible to contain. Entire fleets vanished without a trace. Worlds that stood for millennia were turned to lifeless husks. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to erase. A deep sense of unease settled over the gathered officers. The Galactic Union had fought countless wars before, against pirates, rogue AI, entire empires. But this was different. There were no demands, no transmissions beyond that first chilling message, no treaties, no negotiations, no chance of surrender. The humans had returned as a force of nature, and the Union was powerless to stop them. Von's claws tightened against the edge of the command table. "Show me the latest battle report." One of his officers hesitated before stepping forward. Sir, you're not going to like it. The hologram shifted, showing the aftermath of the most recent engagement over Hera Prime. It had been one of the Union's most fortified worlds. 20 capital ships, 3 orbital defense stations, and a planetary shield array that had withstood a decade-long siege in the last war. It had lasted 16 minutes. The footage showed the human fleet materializing from nothingness. No jump signatures. No warning. One moment empty space, the next death. Their warships didn't fire. Conventional weapons. They simply tore through reality. Entire sections of the defending fleet were consumed by some unseen force, vanishing without so much as an explosion. Ships that tried to flee were frozen mid-flight, as if time itself had betrayed them. The shield protecting Hera Prime collapsed without so much as a flicker. And then nothing. The planet was gone. Not burning, not shattered, simply erased from existence. A silence settled over the war room, thick with unspoken terror. This isn't war, an officer finally whispered. This is extermination. Von forced himself to breathe. His mind raced, searching for some way, any way, to fight back. The humans weren't just powerful, they were impossible. Their ships didn't follow any known laws of physics. Their attacks weren't energy-based, weren't projectile-based. They were using something the Union had never encountered before. Something old. His eyes flicked to the ancient archive he had uncovered earlier. The records were fragmented, inconsistent, filled with the wild fears of long-dead civilizations. But one thing remained consistent in every telling. The humans had been wrong long ago, before even the Galactic Union had formed. There had been whispers of a species that defied the natural order. They had risen too fast, burned too bright. They had reshaped entire star systems, created technologies that broke the fundamental laws of reality. And for that, the early empires had done the only thing they could. They had erased them. Or at least, they had tried. Von's blood turned to ice. The humans weren't an ancient myth. They weren't a forgotten civilization. They were a vengeance long delayed. A beeping sound broke the silence, an incoming transmission. Not from one of their fleets, not from a surviving outpost. From the enemy. For the first time since their warships had appeared, the humans were reaching out. Put it through, Von ordered. The hologram flickered. A figure emerged. Not some unknowable horror, not an alien conqueror. A human male, pale skin, dark eyes that held no anger, no hatred. Only a cold, unwavering certainty. He was dressed in a uniform unlike any Von had ever seen, the insignia on his chest unrecognizable. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of entire dead civilizations. You took everything from us. The war room stood frozen, waiting for what would come next. We are here to take it back. The transmission ended, and across the stars, the human warships advanced once more. Von remained frozen, staring at the empty screen where the human's face had been. The words still echoed in his mind, a sentence heavier than any fleet, deadlier than any weapon. You took everything from us. He had spent his life as a tactician, a strategist, a commander who understood war in every form. But nothing had prepared him for this. The Galactic Union had seen itself as the pinnacle of civilization, the undisputed authority of the known universe. It had outlasted empires, crushed rebellions, and assimilated lesser species. Yet here they were, standing at the edge of annihilation, facing an enemy they had long thought to be nothing more than a fable with unfinished business. "Sir," a voice broke through the silence, trembling. "We have incoming reports from the core worlds." Von snapped out his thoughts. "What kind of reports?" The officer hesitated, then pulled up the data stream. "It's happening everywhere. Planets are vanishing. There's no debris, no ruins, nothing left behind. It's as if they were never there." The war room erupted into chaos. Some officers shouted for retaliation. Others whispered among themselves, too afraid to voice the worst thought of all. "There is no stopping this." A junior officer, barely out his first cycle of service, muttered under his breath, "Gods! What kind of weapons do they have?" Vun's claws dug into the edge of the command table. This wasn't just advanced weaponry. This was something else, something the Union had never understood. He turned toward the archive once more, scrolling through what little remained of the forbidden texts. The earliest mentions of humanity described them not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as something even more dangerous, architects of reality. They had shaped the cosmos in ways that defied understanding, bent physics to their will, created, destroyed, and rewritten existence itself. The old empires had feared them, had joined forces to wipe them out, and yet humanity had survived somewhere, somehow, long enough to return. The war room's doors burst open as another officer stormed in. "Admiral, we've detected a shift in space-time near the central worlds." Vun's gaze snapped toward the holographic map. A new marker had appeared, one unlike anything he had ever seen. Not a fleet, not a planet, a distortion in the very fabric of reality itself. He knew what it meant. "They're not just destroying planets," he murmured. "They're rewriting history." A stunned silence followed. The humans weren't simply erasing the Galactic Union. They were making sure it had never existed at all. The war room fell into a stunned silence. Even the most battle-hardened officers, those who had faced horrors beyond imagination, stood frozen in disbelief. Humanity wasn't just destroying the Union. They were undoing it. Vun's throat tightened as he watched the impossible readings flood the holographic map. Entire star systems no longer simply burned or crumbled. They had never existed. The coordinates, the records, even the names of once thriving worlds were vanishing from the database, as if they had been nothing more than dreams half-remembered by a dying civilization. He turned toward his officers, his voice hard. "Where's the distortion's epicenter?" A technician hesitated before pulling up a new display. A single location blinked in red. Vun felt his heart stop. The core, the center of the Union, the very world where their civilization had first begun, where the first laws had been written, where the High Council had ruled for over 10,000 years. The humans weren't going for the outlying colonies anymore. They weren't dismantling the Union piece by piece. They were going for its heart. A slow, suffocating horror settled over the room. Every officer, every strategist, every battle analyst knew what that meant. If the core fell, if the humans wiped it from existence, it would be as if the Union had never been. Vun forced himself to breathe. Think. There had to be something, some way to stop this. The humans were powerful, yes, but they were still something. They weren't gods. They weren't invincible. He focused on the last words of their transmission. "You took everything from us." That wasn't just war talk. That wasn't just a declaration of vengeance. It was personal. That meant there was something deeper driving them, something more than just destruction for the sake of it. They wanted something back. Vun looked down at the archive again, scrolling through the oldest records, the most forbidden ones. And finally he saw it, the truth. A war so ancient that even the longest-lived races had tried to forget it. A war waged not against humanity, but against what they had become. The Union's ancestors had feared them, feared what they were building. Humanity had discovered something, some fundamental force, something beyond science, beyond technology. The first empires of the galaxy had seen it, realized how dangerous it was, and made a choice. They hadn't just destroyed humanity's homeworld. They had erased their very place in the timeline, but it hadn't worked. Somehow, against all logic, against all reason, humans had survived outside of time, waiting, watching, rebuilding, until they were ready to come back. Vun's hands trembled as the full weight of it settled upon him. This wasn't war. This was a correction. A countdown to the moment when reality itself would be rewritten. And this time, there would be no mistakes. Vun felt a cold he had never known before settle deep into his bones. This wasn't a battle they could win. This wasn't even a war. It was something far worse, a reckoning. The humans weren't fighting for conquest. They weren't here to rule or enslave. They were here to restore something that had been stolen from them. And that meant there was no stopping them. The war room remained silent, officers staring in muted horror at the unfolding catastrophe. The core was their last bastion, the heart of everything the Galactic Union had built. The thought of it being unmade was too vast, too incomprehensible. Yet on the holographic display, the human fleet was already moving. Vun turned sharply to his comms officer. "Give me a direct line to the High Council. Now." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the Corps' defenses." "Now." There's no time for protocol, no time for tactics. Within moments, the transmission connected, and a massive projection of the Union's ruling council appeared before him. The chamber was in chaos. Leaders shouting, demanding answers, some already preparing escape routes that wouldn't matter. Admiral Vun, the council's grand speaker, said, his voice shaking, "You will launch every remaining fleet at once. We cannot allow these creatures to reach the core." Vun clenched his jaw. "With all due respect, Speaker, you still don't understand. We're not fighting an invasion. We are fighting the end of our reality." The Speaker's eyes narrowed. "Defeatist talk. We have ruled for 10,000 years. We have crushed every enemy because we never let them exist long enough to challenge us." Vun snapped. "The humans were never a myth. They were never lost. They were waiting." The room fell silent. The speaker's expression wavered. "What are you suggesting?" Vun took a slow, measured breath. "They are not mindless destroyers. They didn't erase every world. They didn't erase us the moment they returned. That means there is something they want, something they believe can still be restored." Murmurs spread through the council. A female counselor leaned forward. "You believe we can reason with them?" Vun's voice hardened. "I believe if we don't try, we'll all cease to exist." Another comms officer rushed into the war room, pale and breathless. "Sir, we're receiving a second transmission." Every head in the war room snapped toward him. "From the humans?" Vun asked. The officer swallowed. "No, sir. From the core." Vun turned back to the holographic display. Static filled the screen for a moment. Then an image flickered into view. Not an admiral, not a counselor. A scientist. An old, weary-looking alien with wide, fearful eyes. "Admiral," he gasped, "you need to see this. You need to see." The signal cut out, and at that moment, the first human warships breached the outer defenses of the core. The war room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted conflicting orders, scrambling to respond to the breach. Alarm klaxons wailed through the command center, signaling the final stage of the war. Vun ignored the noise. His mind was fixed on the last transmission. A scientist, not a military leader, not a politician. A scientist. What had he been trying to say? He turned sharply to his comms officer. "Trace that transmission. I want to know where it came from." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the core is under full assault. Our systems are collapsing." "Then find me the last known coordinates." The officer worked frantically, hands flying over the console. A moment later, the location appeared on the holographic map. Deep within the core's central research district, Vun felt something twist in his gut. The core wasn't just the Union's political capital. It was also where its darkest secrets were kept. He turned to his second-in-command. "Order all remaining fleets to hold their positions. No reckless engagements." The officer stared at him in shock. "Sir, if we don't fight back, they'll erase us." "Either way," Vun said coldly, "if we want to survive, we need to understand why they haven't already." The officer hesitated, then nodded grimly. Vun opened a direct channel to the Core's last functional command center. A blurry image appeared, a panicked security officer, his uniform torn, smoke filling the background. "This is Core Command. What's left of it? Admiral, we're losing ground fast." "I don't care about the battlefield. I need access to the research district. Now! The officer flinched. Sir, that area is restricted. Vun's eyes burned with rage. There will be no union left to keep secrets if you don't comply. A pause. Then the officer's shaky hands moved over his console, sending coordinates now. Vun turned to his bridge crew. Prepare for an immediate jump to the core. If those scientists have answers, we're getting them. One officer stepped forward. Sir, what if it's already too late? Vun exhaled slowly. Then we're already dead. Minutes later, his personal cruiser cut through the burning remains of the core's defenses. The battle was already lost. The human fleet moved like silent predators, gliding through the void with impossible precision. Defending warships crumbled in their wake. Shields useless, weapons irrelevant. But they weren't slowing down to occupy the planet. They were heading straight for the research district. Vun's claws clenched. They weren't just attacking. They were retrieving something. His ship raced ahead, diving through the ruined skyline. Fires raged across the city. The streets were filled with fleeing civilians, desperate to escape the coming erasure. The research district loomed ahead. Vun's ship landed hard, engines burning from the descent. He barely waited for the ramp to extend before storming out, weapon drawn. The facility was already compromised. The security doors had been ripped apart, not by weapons, but by some unseen force, something that bent metal and reality alike. And inside, standing before a massive containment vault, was a human from the transmission. The same cold eyes, the same unwavering certainty. Vun raised his weapon. What are you looking for? The human barely glanced at him. Not looking. He placed a single hand on the vault door. Reality shuddered. The door melted, not into liquid, but into nothingness, folding away as if it had never existed. Inside the chamber, something glowed. Something old. Something wrong. Vun stepped forward, horror dawning in his mind. This wasn't a weapon. This wasn't a war machine. It was a prison. And inside, something was waiting. Something that should never have been locked away. Vun turned to the human, voice hoarse. What have we done? The human's expression didn't change. You tried to erase us. His voice was steady, cold. His eyes burned with something older than vengeance. And in doing so, you locked away something far worse. Then he reached into the vault, and the universe itself screamed. The air in the vault grew heavy, as if the very fabric of existence was suffocating under an unseen force. The moment the human reached inside, reality itself seemed to recoil. Walls that had stood for millennia bent inward, the lights overhead flickering as if afraid to illuminate what lay within. Vun watched in frozen horror as the human pulled something from the depths of the containment chamber, a sphere of shifting, writhing energy. It pulsed with a light that wasn't light at all. Something deeper, something ancient, a force that should not exist. The moment it was exposed to open air, the entire facility shuddered. The laws of physics twisted, the floor rippling like water. Space-time itself was unraveling. Vun took a step back. This wasn't a weapon. This was something beyond war. His voice was barely a whisper. What is that? The human's gaze remained fixed on the sphere. What you stole from us. Vun felt his stomach drop. We didn't just erase your people. His voice was hoarse. We erased your power. The human finally turned to face him. There was no rage in his expression, no hatred, only certainty. You feared what we had become, he said. You saw what we could do, what we were meant to be, and instead of coexisting, you chose to end us. His grip tightened around the sphere. But you failed. You never truly erased us. And now we're taking back what was ours. Vun's mind was reeling. This wasn't just revenge. This was a restoration. The humans hadn't simply been warriors or conquerors in the past. They had been creators, architects of reality. They had discovered something no other species had, a force beyond technology, beyond science itself. and the first empires of the galaxy had feared it enough to commit the ultimate crime. They had erased humanity from existence. Or at least they had tried. The ground trembled beneath them. The vault's walls cracked and splintered, the very concept of solidity unraveling. Outside, the human fleet stopped firing. They weren't here to fight anymore, because the real war was already won. Vaughn took a shaky breath. If you activate that, what happens? The human regarded him with an expression almost akin to pity. The timeline corrects itself. Vaughn's blood turned to ice. The timeline corrects itself. That meant the Union, the centuries of conquest, the countless civilizations built atop the ruins of erased history. None of it had ever been real. It was all a fragile construct, a stolen reality that was never meant to exist. And now, the true timeline was returning. Vaughn reached for his weapon, not in anger, not in a last-ditch effort for survival, but because, for the first time in his life, he was truly afraid. The human watched him. You already know there's no stopping this. Vaughn's fingers trembled on the trigger. Then the human crushed the sphere in his hands, and the universe ended. There was no explosion, no cataclysm, no screams, just a great unraveling. The warships flickered and faded, their existence a contradiction that could no longer be sustained. The core, the Union, every star system that had been built atop a lie, undone in an instant, and then, just as suddenly, a new reality emerged. Vaughn gasped as his mind snapped back into place. He was somewhere else, not in the war room, not on the core, not in the Union, because there was no Union. There never had been. He was standing on an unfamiliar world, under a sky filled with stars that felt both foreign and right. The air smelled different. The gravity was unfamiliar. His body was different. He turned his hands over, feeling human flesh. His heart pounded, not two hearts, just one. He stumbled forward, looking around wildly. Others were standing nearby. People he recognized, but they weren't the same anymore. No claws, no scales, no remnants of the species they had once been, because they had never been that species to begin with. They had all been part of the lie, part of the rewritten timeline, and now they were human. Vaughn looked up at the sky, his mind spinning with the weight of a truth too vast to comprehend. The humans hadn't just restored their own past. They had restored the original design of the universe, and everything else had never existed at all. Vaughn stumbled forward, his legs weak beneath him. The ground beneath his feet felt real, but his mind refused to accept it. He was human. His hands trembled as he touched his face. Smooth skin, no hardened ridges, no sharp mandibles. Just flesh. Just him. The sky above stretched endlessly, filled with constellations that felt familiar yet unknowable. Around him, others were stirring. Officers, soldiers, civilians, all of them changed. No longer the varied alien species that had made up the Galactic Union, but human, because they had never been anything else. His breath came shallow, his mind a whirlwind. Was this a dream? A simulation? Or was this real? A figure stood before him, the same man, the same cold, unwavering eyes. The human who had shattered the false reality. Vaughn's voice cracked. What have you done? The human regarded him with something that wasn't quite pity, but not quite triumph either, just acceptance. We restored what was always meant to be. Vaughn shook his head, his mind refusing to process the magnitude of what had happened. But I was... Ain't lie, the human said simply. All of it. The Union, the species you thought you were, the entire galactic order. It was never real. Vaughn fell to his knees, his new body foreign and weak. Then what was real? The human exhaled slowly, glancing up at the stars. A long time ago, humanity reached a point beyond understanding. We stopped following the laws of physics. We learned to write our own. Vaughn could barely breathe. You rewrote reality. The human nodded. We became something more. something the first empires feared. His gaze darkened, so they tried to erase us. They rewrote the universe and cut us out of it. They created the Union to replace us, shaped a false history where humanity had never existed. He looked down at Vun. But you can't erase something that was meant to be. Vun's mind burned with the weight of it all. The war, the destruction. It had never been a battle for territory or revenge. It had been a correction. He turned, looking at the people around him, those who had once been soldiers, officers, leaders of the Union, now just humans. Some were weeping, others in stunned silence, all of them struggling to comprehend that everything they had known, everything they had built, had been nothing but a stolen existence. The human knelt before Vun, his expression softer now, almost understanding. "You weren't our enemy," he said quietly. "You were just lost." Vun swallowed hard. His entire life, his entire identity had been shattered in an instant. What was he supposed to do now? The human stood. "This is your chance to be what you were meant to be." He gestured toward the horizon, where great cities, human cities, rose beneath the sky. "Your real life starts now." Vun stared at him, and for the first time in his existence, his real existence, he had no orders to follow, no war to fight, no union to serve. Just a new world waiting for him. A world that had finally been set right. Vun stared at the horizon, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. Everything he had known, his identity, his purpose, his entire reality, had been a fabrication. And yet, something deep within him stirred, something ancient and familiar. "I remember," he whispered, his voice unfamiliar in his human throat. "Not everything, but fragments." The human, no, not just any human, but Commander Elias Thorne of the Restoration Fleet, nodded slowly. "The memory suppression was never perfect. That's why we survived. That's why we found our way back." Vun looked up at him. "But if we were all human once, why did you attack us? Why not just restore us?" Thorne's expression darkened. "We tried. For centuries, we reached out from the spaces between realities. But the programming was too deep. The Union's founders built fail-safes into a false timeline. Anyone who began to remember was eliminated. Anyone who questioned reality was erased." He turned, gesturing to the sprawling cityscape. "This is Praxis Prime, the heart of what humanity was meant to be, what we all were meant to be." Vun struggled to his feet, his new body feeling simultaneously alien and right. Others around him were doing the same, their expressions a mixture of horror, confusion, and dawning recognition. "What happens now?" a woman asked, her voice trembling. Vun recognized her. She had been Admiral Kresh of the Third Fleet, one of the Union's most decorated commanders. Now she was just human. Thorne's gaze swept over the gathered crowd. "Now we rebuild. Now we remember. Now we become what we were always meant to be." But as he turned away, Vun caught something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, of doubt. "You're hiding something," Vun said, his voice stronger now. "This isn't over, is it?" Thorne hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." He gestured for Vun to follow him. They walked in silence through the gleaming city, past structures that seemed to defy physics, past people who moved with a purpose that felt both alien and familiar. Finally, they reached a massive structure that dominated the skyline, a towering spire of shifting, iridescent material that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. "What is this place?" Vun asked. "The Nexus," Thorne replied. "The center of everything that humanity built before the erasure, the source of our power." Inside, the air hummed with energy. Screens that weren't screens, technologies that weren't technologies. Everything felt beyond comprehension, yet somehow intuitive. Thorne led him to a central chamber, where a group of humans were gathered around a massive holographic display. Except it wasn't a hologram. It was reality itself, folded and manipulated to show the state of the universe. And at its center, a growing darkness. What am I looking at? Vun asked. One of the scientists turned to him. The side effect of restoration. The price we had to pay. Thorne's voice was grim. When the first empires erased us, they didn't just rewrite reality. They created a wound in the fabric of existence. And when we forced our way back, that wound began to bleed. The display zoomed in on the darkness. It wasn't just empty space. It was a void, a cancer in reality itself, spreading slowly but inexorably. The collapse, another scientist said, a cascade failure in the fundamental laws of physics. We estimate we have less than a year before it consumes everything. Vun felt his newfound humanity crumbling beneath the weight of this revelation. You restored the true timeline only to watch it die. Thorne's eyes burned with fierce determination. No, we restored it so we could save it. He turned to Vun. The Union may have been built on a lie, but its people, the species you thought you were, they knew how to fight, how to strategize, how to survive against impossible odds. Understanding dawned on Vun. You need us, the soldiers, the admirals, the commanders. We need everyone, Thorne corrected. Every memory, every skill, every perspective. Humanity before the erasure was powerful, yes, but we were also arrogant. We believed we could rewrite reality without consequences. He gestured at the spreading void. This is our consequence, and we can't face it alone. Vun stared at the display, watching as the darkness consumed star after star. What can we possibly do against that? Thorne smiled grimly. The same thing humanity has always done when faced with extinction. We adapt. We evolve. We overcome. He placed a hand on Vun's shoulder. The question is, will you help us? You, who once commanded the forces of our enemy. Who knows what it means to fight when victory seems impossible? Vun looked around at the chamber, at the faces of humanity's last hope. Then he looked back at the void, the price of truth, the cost of restoration. His voice was steady when he answered, I will. The training was brutal, relearning to exist in human bodies, remembering what they had once been, combining the tactical minds of Union commanders with the reality-shaping abilities of true humanity. Vun stood at the bridge of the Defiance, a warship unlike any the false timeline had ever known. It didn't just travel through space. It rewrote it. Its weapons didn't destroy. They reimagined, and its crew was a mixture of restored humans, each carrying memories of two lives, two realities. Status report, he ordered, the command familiar despite everything that had changed. His second-in-command, once a Zari battlemaster, now a woman named Maya Lin, responded immediately. The void has accelerated its expansion. 17 more star systems consumed in the last hour. Vun nodded grimly. 6 months of preparation, of desperate research, of combining the scientific genius of true humanity with the battle-hardened experience of the Union's finest minds. All for this moment. All ships report in, he commanded. One by one, the captains of the Restoration Fleet responded, each a former Union commander, each now wielding technologies beyond imagination. Thorne's voice came last. Praxis Actual ready. I still think this is suicide, Admiral. Vun smiled faintly at the use of his old title. Some things never change, even when everything else did. Maybe, he agreed, but you restored us for a reason. Time to see if it was the right one. The plan was insanity. Pure, brilliant insanity. They couldn't destroy the void. It wasn't something that could be destroyed. It was an absence, a wound in reality itself. So instead, they would heal it. The fleet moved as one. 30 ships carrying the last, best hope of existence itself. They approached the edge of the void, where stars simply ceased to exist, where physics itself surrendered to nothingness. Deploy the anchors, Vun ordered. Massive constructs, part technology, part conceptual mathematics given form. Detached from each ship, they positioned themselves around the perimeter of the void, their surfaces rippling with impossible energies. Anchors in position, Maya reported. Ready on your command. Vun took a deep breath. If this failed, there'll be no second chance. No reset button. No new timeline. Just the end of everything. Initiate the restoration protocol. The anchors flared to life, not with light, but with something deeper, threads of pure reality woven into the fabric of existence itself. They began to pull, to stitch, to heal the wound that threatened to consume all creation. For a moment, it seemed to work. The void's expansion slowed, then stopped. Then, without warning, it surged. Alarms blared across the bridge. The void is adapting. Maya shouted. It's consuming the anchors. Vun's mind raced. This wasn't just a wound in reality. It was almost alive, reactive, intelligent. Understanding crashed over him like a wave. It's not a void, he breathed. It's them. What? Thorne's voice crackled over the comms. The first empires, Vun said, the pieces finally falling into place. When they erased humanity, they didn't just rewrite reality. They imprisoned themselves outside of it to guard against your return. He stared at the display, watching as the darkness consumed the anchors one by one. And now they're fighting back. Thorne's voice was tight with controlled panic. If you're right, the protocol won't work. We can't restore what's actively resisting restoration. Vun's mind was already racing ahead. Drawing on both his Union tactical training and his newly awakened human intuition, we need to give them a choice. What are you talking about? They erased humanity because they feared what you had become. They rewrote reality because they couldn't conceive of sharing it. But what if they didn't have to? His fingers danced across the controls, reconfiguring the remaining anchors. What if we could create a parallel reality? Not a false one, not a prison, but a genuine alternative. That's impossible, one of the scientists protested. The energy requirements alone would be met by the void itself. Vun finished. It's not just destroying reality. It's consuming it, converting it. We could use that power to create something new. There was a long silence. Then Thorne's voice, quiet but resolute. Do it. Vun's hands moved with certainty, guided by knowledge he hadn't known he possessed until this moment. The Defiance's engines howled as they poured an impossible amount of energy into the reconfigured anchors. All ships, divert power to the Defiance, he ordered. Everything you've got. One by one, the ships of the fleet dimmed as they channeled their energy into Vun's desperate gambit. The anchors began to glow not with the stitching energy of restoration, but with something new, a shimmering, translucent barrier between realities. The void slowed its advance, as if confused. It's working, Maya whispered. Then, without warning, the darkness surged again, not toward the anchors this time, but directly at the Defiance. Brace for impact, Vun shouted. The void struck the ship with the force of a collapsing star. Reality itself bent and twisted around them. The bridge shuddered, systems failing across the board. And in that moment of contact, Vun heard them, not with his ears, but with his mind. Countless voices, ancient beyond measure, filled with fear and rage and desperate determination. You cannot return. You will destroy everything. Vun closed his eyes, focusing on the connection. We're not trying to destroy. We're trying to create. Disbelief, suspicion, millennia of hatred, lies, deception. You would unmake us as we unmade you. Vun poured every ounce of sincerity he possessed into his response. No, we're offering you a choice. Your own reality. Your own existence. Separate but real. Silence. The void's assault paused as if considering. Why? And there it was. The question at the heart of everything. Why offer peace to those who had committed the ultimate crime? Why create rather than destroy? Vun opened his eyes, looked around at the bridge of the Defiance, at humans who had once been aliens, at enemies who had become allies, because that's what humanity was meant to be, not destroyers of worlds, but creators of them. The void seemed to pulse, to shift, to consider, then Slowly it began to change. The darkness softened, becoming translucent, then transparent. Through it, Vaughn could see the shimmer of another reality taking shape. Different but equally valid, equally real. The anchors flared one final time, sealing the boundary between realities. Not a prison, not a wall, but a membrane, permeable, flexible, allowing for communication without domination. On the bridge of the Defiance, exhausted silence gave way to stunned realization. Did we just negotiate with the apocalypse? Maya asked in disbelief. Vaughn leaned back in his chair, a smile slowly spreading across his face. We did more than that. We remembered what we were supposed to be all along. Thorne's voice came over the comms, filled with wonder and a hint of amusement. So after all that, the war, the restoration, the near end of everything, we end up with two realities instead of one? Balance, Vaughn said simply. Not erasure, not dominance, just balance. The Defiance turned away from the now stabilized boundary, heading back toward Praxis Prime. Toward home, Vaughn stood at the viewport, watching the stars slide past. Stars that had always been there, stars that had never existed until now. Stars that would continue to shine in two separate but equally valid realities. The war was over. The gods had returned. And in doing so, they had finally remembered what godhood truly meant. Not to rule, not to destroy, but to create.